James and Lily had been married for almost 10 years, and during that time they had built a life that many would envy. With 2 young children, a cozy suburban home, and a seemingly unbreakable bond, their marriage appeared perfect from the outside. They had navigated the usual challenges of life, balancing careers, raising children, and managing their finances, all while maintaining what James thought was a stable relationship. But recently, something had changed. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Lily had always been outgoing and social, but over the past few months her behavior had shifted. She began working later than usual, attending more work dinners, and spending weekends away on supposed business trips. James, being a trusting husband, never questioned her at first. He assumed she was simply doing what she needed to do for her career. However, small details started to catch James's attention. Lily's phone, once left out in the open, was now always with her, locked with a password James didn't know. The warmth that had once defined their evenings together had faded. Their conversations grew more distant, and their physical connection dwindled. Lily seemed distracted, often lost in thought, her smile not reaching her eyes as it once did. James couldn't pinpoint when the doubt first crept into his mind, but it was undeniable now. The woman he had married, the mother of his children, was keeping something from him. His initial suspicions felt ridiculous, and he tried to dismiss them. He told himself it was the stress of raising kids, the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But the unease gnawed at him. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Lily scrolling through her phone, James decided to confront her gently. "Lily, is everything okay? You've seemed a little distant lately," James asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Lily looked up, surprised. "Distant? No, I've just been busy with work, you know how it is." "I do, but you've been working a lot more lately. I feel like we barely spend any time together anymore," James replied, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want to come across as accusatory, but he needed answers. Lily sighed, putting down her phone. "James, we're just in a busy phase. Work has been demanding, and the kids... It's a lot to handle." James nodded, but the conversation didn't ease his mind. He could sense that something was still off, but he didn't press further. He wanted to believe her, to trust that the woman he had shared his life with for the past decade was being truthful. But as the weeks passed, the distance between them only grew. Lily's late nights continued, and James began noticing more inconsistencies. There were unexplained expenses on her credit card statements, fancy dinners and hotel charges that didn't align with the work trips she mentioned. Her wardrobe had subtly shifted as well. More new clothes, higher heels, a different perfume. One night, as James was putting their children to bed, his daughter, Emma, mentioned something that sent a chill down his spine. "Daddy, Mommy went to a fancy restaurant today. She said it was for work, but she was with a man," Emma said innocently, her young voice full of curiosity. James's heart raced. He tried to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean, sweetie? Did you see Mommy with a friend?" Emma nodded. "Yeah, a man in a suit. They were laughing and talking. I saw them when we went to the park. Mommy didn't see me." James smiled at his daughter, but inside his mind was spinning. A man? Was it just a colleague? Or was there more to it? His worst fears were beginning to take shape, but he wasn't ready to confront them yet. He couldn't, not without more proof. Over the next few days, James became hyper-aware of Lily's actions. Every glance at her phone, every time she left the room to take a call, every vague explanation for her whereabouts sent his mind spiraling. His trust, once unwavering, was now fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed early, James sat alone in the living room, his mind racing. He glanced at her purse, which she had left on the coffee table. His heart pounded in his chest as he debated whether to check her phone. He knew the password. He had seen her enter it once by accident. After what felt like an eternity of indecision, he grabbed the phone. His hands trembled as he unlocked it. There in the messages was what he had feared the most. A conversation between Lily and a man named Adam. The texts were intimate, affectionate, and unmistakably romantic. James felt his stomach drop. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, was having an affair. James felt his heart pounding as he read through the messages on Lily's phone. Each text exchange between her and this man, Adam, was like a stab to his chest. They weren't explicit in detail, but the tone, the flirting, the emotional intimacy was enough to make it clear that this was no ordinary friendship. He scrolled further, finding dates where Lily had supposedly been working late, but instead she had been meeting Adam. His hands trembled as he put the phone back on the table, his mind reeling from the realization. The life he thought he knew was crumbling around him. The woman he had built his life with was hiding something so deeply damaging, something he wasn't sure he could ever forgive. He had always trusted her implicitly, never once doubting her loyalty, but now that trust was shattered. James couldn't bring himself to confront her immediately. He needed time to process, to figure out what to do next. He didn't want to believe that his marriage, the 10 years they had spent together, could end this way. He had to know more. He had to understand why this had happened and how long it had been going on. The following days were torturous. James found himself studying Lily's every move, every word, trying to see if there were more signs he had missed. He watched her as she interacted with their children, smiling and laughing as if nothing had changed. It pained him to think that she could carry on with their family life, knowing she was betraying him behind his back. Every night, James lay awake, replaying the moments in his mind. When had it started? How had he missed the signs? Was it his fault? Had he neglected her in some way? His mind was consumed by self-doubt, questioning every aspect of their relationship. He didn't know who to turn to. Talking to his friends felt like an admission of failure, and he couldn't bear the thought of telling anyone yet. One weekend, Lily announced she had another work trip. It wasn't unusual. She had been traveling more frequently in the past few months, and James had initially accepted her explanations without question. But now every trip felt like a lie. He wanted to ask her about Adam, to demand the truth, but something in him held back. He wasn't ready for the confrontation. Not yet. The night before she left, James couldn't sleep. He sat up in bed staring at the ceiling while Lily lay beside him, seemingly at peace. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close and demand answers. But the fear of what those answers might be kept him silent. Lily woke early the next morning, preparing for her trip. James watched her as she packed her bags, his chest tight with anxiety. She moved around the room with a calm efficiency, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "I'll be back on Sunday night," she said casually as she zipped up her suitcase. "It's just a quick conference, nothing too exciting." James nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay, be safe." She kissed him on the cheek, a gesture that now felt hollow. "I will. Love you." As the door closed behind her, James felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over him. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine when he knew the truth. This trip, it wasn't for work. He was almost certain of it. He had to know for sure. With Lily gone, James took action. He had never considered himself a suspicious or controlling husband. But now the need for answers consumed him. He contacted a private investigator, someone who could follow Lily and give him the proof he needed. It was a step he never imagined taking, but he had no choice. The uncertainty was killing him. The next 2 days were agonizing. James tried to distract himself with the kids, taking them to the park, playing games with them, but his mind was elsewhere. He waited for the call from the investigator, dreading and hoping for the confirmation he needed. On Sunday evening, just hours before Lily was supposed to return, the investigator called. The news was as bad as James had feared. Lily hadn't been at a conference. She had spent the weekend at a hotel with Adam. James felt his stomach churn as the investigator described the details. They had been seen together, laughing, holding hands, completely at ease in each other's company. There was no ambiguity now. Lily was having an affair. When the call ended, James sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He had known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, was with someone else. That night, James sat in the living room waiting for Lily to come home. His mind raced with questions. Why? How could she do this? What had gone so wrong between them that she felt the need to seek out someone else? He thought about their life together, all the memories they had shared, and the future they had planned. Was it all a lie? Was there any way to salvage what they had? Around 10 p.m., the sound of keys jingling at the front door broke through his thoughts. Lily entered the house, her suitcase in tow, looking slightly tired but otherwise calm. "Hey," she said, smiling as she set her bag down. "I'm back." James felt a surge of emotion, anger, betrayal, sadness, all mixing together in a chaotic storm inside him. He stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. Lily looked at him, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" James took a deep breath, preparing himself for what was to come. He had waited long enough. It was time for the truth. The silence between them was thick with tension. James could feel the weight of the words he was about to say, the accusations that had been building in his mind for weeks. Lily stood there, eyes narrowing slightly as she sensed something was wrong, but she hadn't pieced it together yet. Not fully. "I know," James said, his voice trembling slightly as the words escaped his lips. Lily blinked, confused. "Know what? About you and Adam," James continued, his heart pounding in his chest. "I know you've been seeing him." For a moment Lily stood frozen, her eyes widened, and her face paled as the realization hit her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room, leaving them both gasping for breath. How did you?" she stammered, but James cut her off. "Does it matter?" His voice was sharper now, the anger bubbling to the surface. "How long, Lily? How long have you been lying to me?" Lily's hands trembled as she took a step back, as if the physical distance could somehow soften the blow of the confrontation. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears, but the guilt was written all over her face. "James, I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been sneaking around with him for months, Lily. This isn't just some mistake. This is betrayal." Lily's tears spilled over, and she wiped at them quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," James shot back, his voice rising. "You didn't just hurt me, Lily. You destroyed us. You destroyed our family." Lily's breath hitched as the weight of his words hit her. She hadn't fully comprehended the damage until now. The affair had started innocently enough, or at least that's what she had told herself. Adam was a colleague, someone she had worked with on a few projects. He was younger, charming, and always knew how to make her laugh. At first, it was harmless, just light flirtation, a way to break up the monotony of the workday. But then it had escalated, a few drinks after work, a stolen kiss in the back of a taxi, and before she knew it, she was sneaking around behind James's back, lying about work trips and spending weekends in hotels with Adam. She had convinced herself that she could keep the two parts of her life separate, that she could be the perfect wife and mother at home while indulging in this secret affair on the side. But now, standing in front of James, watching the pain and betrayal etched into his face, she realized how wrong she had been. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. How could an apology ever fix this? James shook his head, his fists clenching at his sides. "Sorry isn't good enough, Lily. I trusted you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." Lily didn't know what to say. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head 1,000 times since the affair began, but now that it was happening, she was at a loss for words. She had never meant for it to go this far. She had never meant to hurt James, but she had, and now she had to face the consequences. "How long?" James asked again, his voice cracking. "How long have you been seeing him?" Lily hesitated, her mind racing. Did it matter if she told him the truth? Would it make a difference? She swallowed hard, knowing that no matter what she said, the damage was already done. "About 6 months," she admitted quietly. James let out a bitter laugh, the sound filled with disbelief. 6 months, 6 months of lies, of sneaking around, and I had no idea. God, I'm such an idiot. "You're not an idiot, James," Lily said quickly, taking a step toward him. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just... I don't know. I was lost." "Lost?" James echoed, his voice incredulous. "Lost enough to cheat on me, to sleep with another man behind my back." Lily flinched at his words, the harshness of them cutting deep. She knew she deserved his anger, but hearing it out loud made the reality of her actions even more painful. "It wasn't about him," she tried to explain, her voice shaking. "It was never about him. It was about me. I felt I don't know, invisible, like I wasn't myself anymore. I felt like I had lost who I was, and I guess Adam made me feel alive again. James stared at her, his heart breaking even more with every word. So this was my fault. I wasn't enough for you? No, Lily said quickly, shaking her head. It wasn't your fault, James. You were a good husband, a great husband. This was all me. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And I don't expect you to forgive me. James turned away from her, his mind spinning. How had it come to this? How had the woman he loved turned into someone he didn't recognize? He wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something, but instead he stood there frozen in place, unable to process the enormity of what had happened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, James spoke, his voice low and strained. Is it over? Lily hesitated, her throat tightening. She wanted to say yes, to tell him that it was over, that she had ended it with Adam and was ready to focus on their marriage. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. She hadn't spoken to Adam since that weekend, but part of her still felt drawn to him, still longed for the excitement and freedom he had brought into her life. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. James felt his heart drop even further. He had hoped, prayed that she would tell him it was over, that they could somehow find a way to move forward. But now, hearing her hesitation, he realized that might not be possible. Then, I guess there's nothing left to say, James said, his voice cold and distant. Lily looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Please, James, I don't want to lose you. I love you. James stared at her, his emotions swirling inside him. He had loved her once, more than anything in the world. But now, after everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if that love was enough to save them. Without another word, James turned and walked out of the room and staff, leaving Lily standing there, broken and alone. James left the room, feeling as if a massive weight had settled on his chest. He could barely breathe, and the air in the house felt thick with unresolved tension. He didn't know where to go or what to do, only that he needed to be away from Lily. Away from the woman who had lied to him for so long, who had shared her life with another man while he remained blissfully ignorant. He wandered outside into the backyard, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the heat of his emotions. The garden, once a place of tranquility where he had spent hours with Lily and the kids, now felt foreign to him. The memories that had once brought joy now seemed tainted, overshadowed by the knowledge of her betrayal. He slumped down onto one of the patio chairs, his hands trembling slightly as he rubbed his face. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just months ago, he had believed that his marriage was strong, unbreakable even. They had weathered so much together, raising 2 children, buying their first home, juggling the demands of work and family life. Yet all it took was one man to unravel everything they had built. As James sat in the quiet darkness, he thought back to the early days of their relationship. He remembered how effortless it had all seemed, how they had connected on every level, how they had dreamed of a future together. They had promised each other forever, and for the longest time, he had believed in that promise. He had never doubted Lily's love for him, not until now. Suddenly, the back door creaked open and Lily stepped out onto the patio. She hesitated for a moment, as if uncertain whether she should approach him. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and the guilt that hung over her was palpable. "James," she whispered, her voice shaking, "can we talk?" James looked up at her, his expression a mixture of anger and sadness. He didn't respond immediately, unsure if he had the strength to hear any more from her, but something in her voice, the raw vulnerability of it, made him nod reluctantly. Lily took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was standing a few feet away from him. She didn't sit down, but instead stood there, wringing her hands together as she struggled to find the right words. "I don't know what to say," she began softly. "I know that I've hurt you. I know that I've broken your trust, and I hate myself for it." James stared at her, the bitterness in his heart threatening to consume him. "Why, Lily? Why did you do it?" Lily bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I don't have a good answer for that." "I wish I did. I've been trying to figure it out myself. It's not that I don't love you, because I do. I love you more than anything." James scoffed, his voice filled with disbelief. "You don't cheat on someone you love." Lily winced at his words, but she didn't argue. "You're right," she whispered. I should have never let it happen, but it's more complicated than that. I felt lost. I felt like I was disappearing. Between work, the kids, and everything else, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. James frowned, struggling to make sense of her explanation. And Adam, he was your solution. Sleeping with another man was your way of finding yourself. Lily wiped at her tears, shaking her head. No, it wasn't like that. Adam, he made me feel noticed. He made me feel alive. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just a wife or a mother. I felt like me. James felt his anger surge again, a flash of rage coursing through him. So you just threw away our life together for some guy who made you feel special? What about me, Lily? Did I ever matter? Of course you did. Lily cried, her voice breaking. James, you're everything to me. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I got caught up in my own feelings, my own needs, and I lost sight of what really matters. James stared at her, his heart aching. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that she truly regretted her actions. But the pain of her betrayal was too fresh, too raw. He didn't know if he could ever forgive her. What happens now? James asked, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. Lily wiped her eyes again, her breath hitching as she tried to steady herself. I don't know, she admitted. I want to fix this. I want to make things right between us. But I don't know how. James looked away, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave her and never look back. But another part of him, the part that still loved her, couldn't imagine a life without her. Despite everything, he still wanted to believe that they could find a way through this. I don't know if we can fix this, James said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Lily's heart sank, and she took a small step forward, her voice pleading. Please, James, don't give up on us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make things right. For us, for the kids. James clenched his jaw, his emotions warring inside him. He thought of their children, of the life they had built together. Could he really just walk away from it all? Could he leave his kids in a broken home because of her mistake? I need time, James said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I can't make any promises, Lily, but I need time to figure out what to do. Lily nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I understand, she whispered. I'll give you as much time as you need. With that, James stood up and walked past her, heading back into the house. He needed space, he needed air. Most of all, he needed to be away from her. As he walked upstairs to their bedroom, he felt a sense of emptiness settle over him, as if the love he had once felt for Lily had been replaced by a hollow void. Over the next few weeks, James distanced himself from Lily as much as possible. They continued to live under the same roof for the sake of their children. But the bond they had once shared was fractured, perhaps beyond repair. They communicated only when necessary, their conversations stilted and awkward. Every time James looked at Lily, all he could see was Adam, his presence looming over their marriage like a dark cloud. Lily, for her part, tried her best to give James space, while also showing him that she was committed to making things right. She ended her relationship with Adam immediately after their confrontation, cutting off all contact with him. But despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the guilt that consumed her. She knew that no matter what she did, she might never win back James's trust. The tension in the house was unbearable. Their once happy home had become a battleground of unspoken resentment and unresolved pain. Even the children sensed the change, though they were too young to understand the full extent of what had happened. James hated the idea of putting them through this, but he didn't know how to move forward. Every time he thought about forgiving Lily, the image of her with Adam resurfaced in his mind, reigniting his anger. One evening, as James sat alone in the living room, he heard a soft knock on the door. He frowned, not expecting any visitors. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see his best friend, Mark, standing there. Hey, Mark said, offering a small smile. I figured you could use some company. James stepped aside, allowing Mark to enter. They hadn't spoken much since the affair had come to light. James had been too embarrassed, too ashamed to tell anyone. But somehow, Mark had always known when something was wrong. As they sat down in the living room, Mark glanced at James, his expression serious. You want to talk about it? James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't even know where to start. Mark nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know I'm here." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging between them. Finally James spoke, his voice low and strained. "I don't know if I can ever forgive her." Mark didn't respond immediately, giving James the space to continue. "I love her, Mark, I've always loved her, but after what she did, I don't know if I can get past it." "It's not an easy thing to forgive," Mark said quietly, "but the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to try? Do you want to rebuild what you had?" James stared at the floor, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Did he want to try? Could he even imagine a future without Lily? The conversation with Mark lingered in James's mind over the next few days. His friend's words echoed in his thoughts. Could he rebuild what he had with Lily? And more importantly, did he want to? There was no simple answer. Forgiving her felt impossible, yet the idea of living without her, without their family intact, was just as unbearable. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, James found himself pacing the living room. His mind was racing, going over every detail of the affair, every lie Lily had told. He couldn't shake the images in his head. Their text messages, the weekends she had spent with Adam, the betrayal that had shattered their marriage. But as much as he hated her for what she had done, he couldn't deny the love he still felt for her. Before he could stop himself, James found himself walking up the stairs to their bedroom. Lily was sitting on the edge of the bed, reading a book, but she looked up as soon as he entered the room. The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I've been thinking," James said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was tense, and he could feel his emotions bubbling to the surface. Lily set the book aside, her expression wary. She hadn't pushed him for a conversation in weeks, knowing that he needed space. But now, as she watched him, she sensed that something had shifted. "About us," James continued, his throat tightening as he spoke the words aloud. "About whether we can come back from this." Lily's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been dreading this conversation, but at the same time, she knew it was inevitable. James deserved answers, and she owed it to him to be honest. "I don't know if we can," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "But I want to try, James. I want to do whatever it takes to make things right." James stood there, staring at her, his emotions swirling inside him. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that she was committed to fixing their marriage. But the pain of her betrayal still lingered, casting a shadow over every interaction they had. "How do I know it won't happen again?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. "How do I know you won't just find someone else and do this all over again?" Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head quickly. "You don't," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I can't give you that guarantee, James, but I can promise you that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn your trust back. I know I hurt you. I know I broke us, but I want to fix it. I want to fix us." James clenched his fists, his frustration and anger bubbling to the surface. How? How do we fix this, Lily? How do I forget what you did? How do I get those images out of my head? The thought of you with him, it's like a knife in my heart." Lily let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to fix this. I just know that I don't want to lose you. I love you, James. I've always loved you." James's chest tightened, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the regret and guilt that weighed heavily on her. But that didn't erase the fact that she had lied to him for months, that she had shared her heart and her body with someone else. "I need more than just words, Lily," James said finally, his voice low. "I need to see that you mean it. I need to see that you're willing to fight for this marriage." Lily nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. "I will. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I'll do it." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if that's enough," he admitted, "but I guess it's a start." For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope ignited in Lily's chest. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. It was a chance to rebuild what they had lost. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and there were no promises that they would make it through this. But she was willing to try, even if it meant starting from scratch. In the weeks that followed, James and Lily began the slow, painful process of rebuilding their marriage. They started attending counseling together, working through the layers of pain, resentment, and mistrust that had built up between them. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and hurt seemed too overwhelming to bear. But for every setback, there was a small victory. An honest conversation, a moment of vulnerability, a step toward healing. Lily threw herself into proving to James that she was committed to their marriage. She cut off all contact with Adam, deleting his number from her phone and blocking him on every platform. She knew that regaining James's trust would take time, perhaps years, but she was willing to wait. She was willing to fight for them. James, for his part, struggled with his conflicting emotions. He still loved Lily. He had never stopped loving her, but the wound of her betrayal was deep. There were nights when he would lie awake, replaying the events of the past few months in his mind, wondering if he had made the right decision in staying. But then he would see Lily with their children, laughing and playing as if nothing had changed, and he would remember why he had chosen to fight for their family. Their progress was slow, and there were moments when it felt like they were walking on eggshells around each other. But over time, the tension began to ease. They started to talk more openly, sharing their fears and insecurities. Lily admitted that she had felt lost in her role as a wife and mother, overwhelmed by the demands of their life together. James acknowledged that he had taken her for granted, assuming that their love was unbreakable, without putting in the effort to nurture it. One evening, after a particularly difficult counseling session, James and Lily sat together in the living room. The silence between them was no longer tense, but reflective. "Do you think we'll ever get back to what we had before?" Lily asked quietly, her eyes searching his. James looked at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "No," he said honestly. "I don't think we can ever go back to how things were. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we need to build something new, something stronger." Lily nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. "I want that," she whispered. "I want to build something new with you." James reached out, taking her hand in his. It was the first time they had touched in weeks, and the gesture felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. "We'll get there," James said softly. "It's going to take time, but we'll get there." Lily squeezed his hand, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't a promise of a perfect future, but it was a step in the right direction, and for now that was enough. As the months passed, James and Lily continued to rebuild their life together, step by step. Their marriage was no longer the idyllic picture it had once seemed from the outside, but they had come to terms with that reality. The cracks in their foundation were visible, but rather than ignoring them, they had decided to face those imperfections head-on, determined to heal them together. Counseling sessions became a regular part of their lives, sometimes grueling and filled with raw, painful emotions. They talked through every difficult topic, no matter how uncomfortable. There were sessions where James vented his pent-up anger, moments when he questioned why Lily had betrayed him, and days when he doubted if he could ever move on from the affair. The pain was still present, lingering beneath the surface of their daily routines, but it had begun to lose its sharp edge. It no longer consumed him in the same way. Lily, for her part, threw herself fully into the healing process. She understood the depth of the wound she had caused and knew that it would take years, if not a lifetime, for James to fully trust her again. She committed herself to transparency, allowing James access to every part of her life. She changed her routines, quitting the job where she had met Adam and finding new work closer to home. She gave James her phone's passcode without him asking, removed all forms of secrecy, and deleted every possible connection to Adam. Despite these efforts, there were still moments of insecurity for James. Sometimes late at night when they were lying in bed, he would find himself wondering if she still thought about Adam, if there was a part of her that still missed him. He didn't always voice these thoughts, but the doubt gnawed at him in the quiet hours. Trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild, and though Lily was doing everything she could, James knew it would take time for him to fully let go of his fears. Their children, Emma and Noah, were young enough to be oblivious to the full extent of what had happened between their parents, But even they had sensed the shift in the household. The tension that had once hung over the dinner table had lessened, and slowly the sense of normalcy began to return. James and Lily made a conscious effort to spend more time as a family, taking the kids to the park, going on weekend trips, and creating new memories that weren't tainted by the past. One Saturday afternoon, James and Lily took the kids to the beach. It was a warm, sunny day, and the children ran ahead, laughing and playing in the sand. As James watched them, he felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. There was so much joy in these simple moments, but there was also the lingering thought of how close they had come to losing everything. Lily stood beside him, her feet sinking into the sand, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've been thinking a lot," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the waves. James glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "About what?" "About what?" "About us. About how far we've come, but also about how much further we have to go," she admitted. "I know I've said it before, but I just want you to know how sorry I am for everything. There are days when I wake up and I still can't believe I let it happen, that I hurt you like that." James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the words sink in, allowing himself to process them. They had had this conversation countless times, but each time it felt a little different. Each time it felt a little more real. "I know," James said softly, his gaze following the movement of their children in the distance. "And I know you're doing everything you can to make up for it. I see that. It's going to take time." Lily nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of his words. "I'll wait as long as it takes." For the first time in months, James felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of resolution, but rather the peace of acceptance. He had come to realize that the healing process wasn't linear. There would be good days and there would be bad days. There would be moments of doubt and moments of clarity. But through it all, he knew that both he and Lily were committed to trying. As they stood there, side by side, watching their children play in the surf, James reached out and took Lily's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to believe that they had a future together. In the months that followed, James and Lily continued to grow closer, though their journey was far from easy. There were still moments of tension, times when the memories of the affair resurfaced, and the trust between them wavered. But with each passing day, those moments became fewer and farther between. They had learned to communicate in ways they never had before. Their conversations were no longer filled with surface-level pleasantries. Instead, they delved deep into the heart of their relationship, exploring the vulnerabilities that had once been hidden. Lily spoke openly about the feelings of loneliness and inadequacy that had led her to seek out attention elsewhere, and James, in turn, shared his own fears and insecurities. Counseling had taught them both the importance of honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. They had learned to navigate the complexities of their relationship with a newfound sense of understanding. There were days when they laughed together, moments when they felt like the couple they had been before the affair. But there were also days when the scars of the past felt too raw to ignore. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, sipping wine and watching the stars, Lily turned to James, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think we'll be able to move on from this completely?" she asked quietly. James considered her question for a moment before shaking his head. "No," he said honestly. "I don't think we'll ever forget what happened, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to forget." Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "Do you think we'll be okay?" James reached over, taking her hand in his. "I think we'll be better than okay," he said softly. "I think we'll be stronger." And in that moment, as they sat together under the stars, James felt a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in a long time. Their marriage wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was real, and it was theirs, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough.